Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to welcome Mark McFadyen, the Group Operations Director at Brewhouse Kitchen, to talk to us today. Mark, thank you so much for making time.
My pleasure. Nice to see you, Bob.
So, Mark, we'll jump straight in. Excluding your current company, what's the best operational environment you've ever worked in? You don't necessarily need to say who it was, but what were the characteristics of the best operation you ever worked in, excluding Brewhouse Kitchen?
Yeah, I'll avoid saying who, but look, what makes a great operational environment for me is when a team really works well together, and you've got that trust and belief in each other, and that shared vision of where you're going. The brands and teams I've led, which have seen most success, certainly are those where you've got really close alignment between operations, and then I think specifically the commercial and people functions within a business. And it's really important that the operators within a brand environment don't just get a brand, but really understand, if you like, the essence and beliefs of a brand, so that every decision they're making fits and aligns with, I suppose, the guest expectation you're trying to put out there. I think from a people side also that there's a real trust and faith in the delivery from the company and the team within, and that I suppose you've got this want that everybody wants not just their individual pub or business to succeed, but the success of the company and the brand overall.
How common do you think it is in the sort of UK hospitality industry for businesses to be that aligned and set up for operational excellence? Like in percentage terms, what would be your guess?
I'd say I think sometimes there could be a big gap between frontline and the realities of where a head office function believe that they're at. I think true alignment. I think probably 50% of businesses have got that real true alignment where everybody really understands what they're trying to achieve and where they're at, and that absolute belief in your organization that they're doing the right things, and that trust. I don't think it's everywhere, certainly.
Amazing. So if you're watching this, 1 in 2 of you, you have to guess. You have to speak. As you're watching this, ask yourself which side of that coin you're on.
Listening. The key is talking to your team. Going out and understanding their views, and something I'm a massive believer in. Taking out time to run team forums and understand what their views are and how they sit alongside that head office or business support expectation.
Tell us a bit about Brewhouse Kitchen, Mark. What attracted you to the brand in the first place, and what would you say sort of defines the business in terms of what you're going for?
Well, I've been with B&K for 3 years now, having come from a pure hospitality background, 25 or so years in the industry, and I think I was always quite fixed on working in pubs. But back doing a management degree, I think looking at the industries you could work in, I was certainly a massive fan of pubs at that time, and certainly invested a lot of money at that time in the industry. And I think I had a period of time working through a lot of the larger organisations, starting off in Bass, Scotch Newcastle, Spirit, Green King, and leading brands or operating divisions where I think it is quite a different role within a large organisation. For me, the opportunity to join B&K, which was then a smaller company and brand, and operate in that different environment you have when you're operating a small company, was a massive appeal for me at the time. Certainly enjoyed it. Certainly had a huge amount of learning and development. I think when you're in a small organisation, you certainly learn a lot about yourself. And you've got to have an awful lot more fearlessness and self-sufficiency in what you do. You need to roll up your sleeves and make things happen, and happen quickly.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? We definitely found that over the last couple of years in my small business, for sure. What would you say are some of the biggest learning moments you've had through your career generally, Mark, but particularly over recent years and with Brewhouse Kitchen?
I think the biggest, the last 2 years has probably had some pretty big learning for a lot of people and a lot of companies. It's certainly been uncharted territory that we've all been operating in. And I think in some ways we've seen the best and worst of some leaders and some companies as they've adapted to operate in, let's be honest, it's been a disaster type scenario. Certainly, I think it's been a test of agility for many. I think those that have been able to best adapt and adapt in the most appropriate ways has separated some. Also, I think there's been a lot of learning around the breaking down of barriers between different companies within hospitality that maybe saw themselves as competitors previously. As I think it felt like we were all in the same boat, and the playing field was very much leveled, and the focus moved into being one of protecting and doing the best for hospitality and the industry as a whole. I'm certainly massively and incredibly proud of how my team have acted and reacted through the COVID crisis. We certainly established very early on that our priority was protecting the biggest asset we had, which is our people. I think really then galvanized all our actions around supporting them, aligning them so that we could come out of it when we were able to trade and trade stronger. So yeah, we during the closure period, we used our time wisely. We focused on training, developing our people. We reviewed our assets through a critical lens, took some time to address some of the issues or opportunity in the buildings. I guess the biggest learning for me during that time was the importance of strong individual leadership at every level in the business, and how people actually looked after the individuals within the team. Certainly, from my view, that our businesses that came out fighting the strongest were those teams that were, again, that word, aligned with their leaders and determined to best recover.
Yeah, we saw a ton of that across the industry. It's been interesting, actually. And people have been talking about culture and alignment forever. We all know it's management 101. I think a lot of us that thought we understood it realized we didn't understand it quite as well as we thought until we got into for many of us, the first true crisis of our careers. One of the things I've experienced is that as you begin to talk about values and culture, you do lose quite a lot of people. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because so many people in the industry, or maybe your 50%, haven't necessarily experienced what it's like to work in a truly aligned organization, and therefore they understand the word culture, but they don't know what it kind of feels like. And one of the exercises I've started doing that I find quite fun, and we're doing on this series, is rather than asking people what their values are, which can end up, even if they're sincerely held, sounding a bit like a poster for a sort of staff room. I like asking people what their anti-values are. Most often, anti-values are the sort of mirror image of your values, but not always. So if I asked you what your anti-values are, as in like, what are the things that you just won't stand for on a Mark McFadyen team? I'd love to hear that.
Well, I think for me, honesty and openness is massively important. I work at pace. I think everyone does in hospitality.
I know that. I've worked for you.
And I need my teams to work at pace. And with that, you really need to trust every member of your team. So, I'm a big believer in a transparent work environment at every level. I think it's really important that if something's less than perfect, which, let's be honest, everything isn't going to be perfect all the time. And that's not a big issue. But I think it's really important that within your team you're open about it and you're constantly striving and committed to be the best. But where I struggle is or where I'm certainly least comfortable is where there's an environment where you have a lot of defensiveness, or a team that looks to detract from the issues or try and paint over cracks, or even make things appear better than in reality they actually are.
Can you test for that in the sort of inbound selection process, or is it something you find out in probation or through referencing? Like, how do you screen to make sure that anti-value doesn't sneak onto your bus?
I think there's clues as you get to know people. I think, if you look at some of the great operational or just great leaders across the industry, they are people that are quite open. They're naturally, wear their hearts on their sleeves and are very giving of themselves and who they are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And it's certainly something I admire. And I think it helps establishing rapport with any leader, understanding them. And so for me, when I meet someone that I want to bring into the business, I want to get to know them and talk openly about themselves and their careers, where they've been, and positives and negatives. And I think the people that will constantly speak positives only or negatives only, I think it's always worth questioning that a little bit more.
So if I want a job with you, I've got to come into an interview and bare my soul, right? Tell you everything I've done wrong, and that will form that trust.
Yeah, I think it will certainly, opening yourself an interview is a two-stage process. It's about being open and honest about what you want from an organization, what environment you're going to best perform at. So I think it's in the benefit of everyone to be upfront and honest around what you look for and what your expectations are, as well as talking about yourself and the company to make a view on whether or not how you fit within that organization.
Well, I think that for anybody that's dealt with Brewhouse and Kitchen, that definitely comes through, that there's a sort of friendly, forthright culture, which I think people warm to that for sure. Like I can see the smile on your face, but it's definitely that does actually run through pretty much everyone you meet. It was what makes your team fun to work with.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think
and they're competitive as well.
That's a personal characteristic as well as one of the organisations. I think be yourself. I look to bring personalities into a business. Real people, and with that you accept everything that people are. The good and the bad. But you can only ever be yourself. Authentic leadership is I think something that I certainly value an awful lot.
Yeah, 100%. How prescriptive is the business on values and your sort of operating principles?
We have obviously a set of values which are quite important, and they've changed over time. When I first came into the company, actually, we used to have a value of guests first, which I struggled with slightly. And actually, we've changed that over time. We switched that value into team first.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think it was actually quite a pivotal point for us in the structure. It was sort of ahead of the pandemic. And I think, having a view that delivering a great guest experience by actually driving your people first and foremost is quite a fundamental change to how you then structure your training and your focuses. And then sort of added on to that, we did a lot of work around purpose and developed a shared purpose, which we have now, which sits throughout our organisation. Something that we call Brewing Happiness.
Okay.
And it's about, what we look for our team to be doing each and every day, which is to focus on those opportunities to create happiness for both the team, with your colleagues and with each other, and also obviously our guests that pay all our wages. I suppose by creating memorable moments and trying to build a rapport with guests and each other on a deeper level, try and create more than just transactional interactions, which is obviously one of the key foundations of Brewhouse and Kitchen. That we're about experiences. Experiences are personal. Everyone has a personal perception of what they experience, and
Well, one of the things I find is something to be admired in Brewhouse and Kitchen and in your team is that, like, it's always awkward talking about this culture stuff because it can sound platitudinous, and so you sort of do need to press to go a bit deeper so that to get sort of meaning from some of these expressions. But when I go into a Brewhouse and Kitchen, one of the things that I feel like is almost an unfair advantage for you is when you've got the brew pub element, you can actually make that meaningful for the colleagues, because you're not trying to sort of imbue them with this sort of fake sense that they own the menu in some way or they own the product in some way, that there's a little piece of them in the proposition beyond the smile that they bring to a table. I think in many cases that they do give across this sense of sort of ownership of the product, or at least some of the products. And I think that's really interesting. I don't know how deliberate that was, but it definitely comes through in aligning with that sense of purpose.
When I talk about authentic leadership, but as far as the brand proposition, those businesses, it's been a feature of the last 10 years. Some of the businesses that have best performed or been most successful have been those which have got a very strongly differentiated offer, or something that is unique to them. And our our experience is as authentic as you get. It is, we're not trying to to peddle something that's not ours. Our brewers, you have a head brewer in every single one of our businesses that's making their beer, that's put their love, passion, and hard work into making that beer. And it's very easy to sell something that you've put your labor of love into actually preparing and creating. So yeah.
I can see why that would attract you. And I am still trying to, I'm an optimist. So I sort of believe that good leaders that go into businesses, even if they need turnaround, can find something magical in them. But it is harder with just, a small subset of the sector where there actually isn't really a truly differentiated proposition. And you get these great leaders that have been persuaded to come into the brand, and then they're desperately trying to find something magical to give the mission meaning.
No, absolutely. And I've looked after brands in my career where, we've tried to sort of position what makes us unique. And I think sometimes you can have an internal dialogue around what makes you unique and differentiated, but that just doesn't translate, and it doesn't, actually come across to the guest at all.
What would your advice be to an up and coming operational leader in that situation? Would it be as brutal as to say, go find a great business with a differentiated proposition that you can stand behind?
Yes.
It's a punchy question, but it's fair, right?
I think it does help if you have got a strongly differentiated offer. So long as that offer is obviously in a sector that's in growth and that's going to expand. I think as far as my advice, to people in the sector, I'd probably talk more around, as far as I think there's a big leadership challenge out there now, insofar as understanding the needs, wants, and drivers of this sort of post-pandemic workforce, and how you actually create a climate which allows and caters for the people, I think, which is a bit more key. Lots of people are talking about Gen Z, and in a few years we'll be talking about Gen Alpha as they come into our teams, which are another species again. I think the differences in their needs and wants compared to those of Gen X and baby boomers. I think the reality that in a lot of cases in hospitality, we've got people leading with very different views on what motivates and drives performance between those actually employed on the front line. So I think any leader, whatever generation they're from, needs more than ever now to kind of, I've said it already, take time to listen to the needs and the drivers of the individuals in their business, ensure that, if you like, the language that you're talking is translating correctly into what's actually being heard through the organization. I talked before that, about, the importance of things like, for me, team forums, engagement surveys, but just taking time to actually listen and adjust your thinking in line with the feedback we get, which, giving you a bit of a plug, Yapster's been a great tool for us in helping how we communicate through the company, and, if you like, remove barriers between seniority levels across the levels of the business, because everybody can reach out and talk to everyone, and that's been really, really useful for us.
Well, I appreciate that. And what I always say to folks, we believe in this idea of social leadership, which is actually sort of one step above the Yapster product itself. The truth is, when you've got good leaders and good culture, you do need a product, but Brewhouse and Kitchen would be successful probably on any inclusive mobile messaging service. I actually think that's the coolest thing. We sort of think that a rising tide is going to raise all boats. The thing that's actually limiting Yapster's growth is there's a deficit of good quality leaders across the sector that care about having meaningful, connected two-way conversations. And I think you're right, as that sort of, there's that changing of guard, that you get more and more leaders coming in that, in order to be successful, have to connect with the front line. They're going to need tools to connect them with the front line. And some of them will choose Yapster, some of them will choose other things. And the ones that choose nothing possibly won't stay in their leadership positions for that long. I would say that, but I do actually believe it. And I think businesses like yours and leaders like you give me more and more confidence in that thesis.
Yeah, communication is, every time I ever talk to people on the front line, they'll always talk about communication. It's really, really important to people, how they're communicated to, the regularity of it. how two-way communication is, or whether or not it just moves downwards through an organization. It's very, very important.
How has your leadership style evolved over the years? Like, were you different at the beginning of your managerial leadership career than you are now?
Absolutely. I think everybody develops and evolves. I think there's some elements of yourself that you remain true to. I mentioned I'm a big believer in sort of authentic leadership, using your own style. I think I've developed more patience and understanding than I ever had, which obviously balanced with wanting to be very much driven by pace, and wanting things to happen very, very quickly. But I also think it's easy to have a want to control everything in operations in order to drive performance. I think it's quite an important stage of learning for leaders to understand when to step back and actually ensure that you're allowing teams the freedom and space to make the best decisions, whilst within an operation environment still having capacity to dive into the detail when that's required as well.
That's something I've, like, on a personal level, I really struggle with, because I obviously didn't come up through a sort of classic managerial program. It's one of the coolest things about going into hospitality. You can join quite young, get unbelievable managerial and operational exposure that you don't really get in something like I did as a baby lawyer before I turned over to this. And that sort of lunging between over delegating and under delegating is fascinating to me. Were you naturally a delegator, or were you naturally a controller as you sort of then found your level?
Not naturally wanted to control, but naturally wanting to be involved. I like to kind of to multitask and to be involved in lots of things and be part of lots of discussions. I think it's quite important to look at those, the old classic 4 stages of leadership. What is the right stage of leadership with each individual at any one time. There's a time when when the pandemic first hit, there was a time for some urgent action and some quite heavy control, and there's a lot of times where the best results will always be when people really own their own decisions, and that's how you really get the best out of people. So delegation will always be the preferred option.
So I could easily talk to you all day, but I know you're a busy man, so I'll wrap up with just one more question. There's been a tremendous amount of churn in the sector at all levels because of what's happened with the pandemic. For those that are watching that have just gone into a new operational leadership role, or are just about to go into a new operational leadership role, what would you recommend that people should think about over their, first sort of 30, 60 days, in terms of what would be your priorities going into somewhere new?
I think it's really important to be consistent and to be seen as a consistent person. I've said it before. I think when you go into a new business, you've got to get to know the people and the individuals in the business. So you've got to spend time with them. You've got to ask questions, but the important bit is actually in the listening. Going into a new business, I think you've also got to understand that sort of brand or company essence. The purpose, what's driving them forward, what's the vision? Is that vision shared? Something that's important for me, and I think it's important for a lot of people as well, is clarity. People want within a team to know what's really clearly expected of them. What great looks like. I think if you're talking about the first 60 days of a business, and a lot of the businesses I've gone into, I think that first stage is, let's listen, let's understand the viewpoints, and then let's set some clear expectations, some clear clarity around what great looks like, and then let's all head towards that as a group, as a team.
So generally not pursue the bull in the china shop strategy is what I'm picking up from that.
Yeah, it doesn't work quite so well, that one.
Mark McFadyen, thank you so much for making the time to do this. I'm sure that people will have got a ton out of it. I certainly have.
Absolute pleasure.